right, well, we are in a new series that Pastor Tony kicked off last week. It's called the Nehemiah Blueprint, Rebuilding Your Life. And as Pastor Tony shared last week, this series is an analogy for how we should live our lives. Just as Nehemiah in the Old Testament was called to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, there are areas in our life that God is calling to be rebuilt as well. And as we pay special attention to these areas in our lives, we'll begin to see a greater work that God wants to do in us and through us. And so today as we begin, I want to just start by asking you a question. You don't have to raise your hand, just want you to be thinking about this. Have you ever noticed that there are things in everyday life that you just learn to live with? You just learn to live with them. Things that are broken, but they're not quite broken enough to deal with. Maybe it's a broken item in your house that you've been meaning to repair, but you just haven't gotten around to it yet, right? Something like that. I'll give you an example of one on my end, and for those who have frequented my house, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. But in our dining room, we have a dining room chair, and this chair is broken. And me being the good homeowner I am, instead of repairing it, I put a big blue painter's tape X on the chair. And it's been there for about 4 years now. And so that X is there to remind me every time I pull that chair out to fix it, but my natural response is, I'll get to that one of these days. And I just push it right back in, and it has not been fixed since. So for me, that's something in my house. Maybe for you, maybe there's a window, maybe there's a leaky faucet. There's something in your life that you have to get to that soon, right? Maybe all of us have this, the infamous junk drawer. So this is not my drawer. My drawer actually probably looks worse than this. I have a drawer that's in my closet it's a top shelf, and each year it gets harder and harder to put things in this drawer. And it's just those things that, you just don't want to deal with, so where do they go? They go in this junk drawer, and it's not organized. There's no system to it. It's just there. And you think, every now and then I will wake up and I'll think, I need to get to that junk drawer. I need to look through that. And then I second guess myself and I think, nope, it's just staying exactly like it is. Maybe for some of you, maybe it's a phone that's been cracked. The screen has been cracked and you've been reading texts and messages through a spider web of glass. And now I know some of you are probably feeling attacked right now. I know a couple of you in the church that have cracked phone screens. So there are just things like this that we learn how to deal with in our everyday lives, right? We adapt, we work around them, we stop noticing them. At first, it bothered you every time you saw it. But after a while, it just becomes something that's normal. And I wonder if that's not just true in our houses, but in our hearts and even our world. There are things that are broken, but they've been broken for so long that we've just learned to live with them. Broken families, broken systems, broken communities, broken lives. The list goes on. And what used to move us, what used to bother us, what used to make us say something needs to change eventually just becomes background noise in our lives. But every once in a while, something happens that breaks through the normal. Something stirs you on the inside, something that unsettles you again. It makes you realize, I can't ignore this thing anymore. And what if that's not just emotion? What if that's actually something deeper? Because in Scripture, there's a moment where an ordinary man stops living his ordinary life. And suddenly, something that's broken in this world stops being normal to him. Jerusalem is in ruins. The walls are destroyed. People are discouraged. And for years, it has stayed that way. But then Nehemiah hears about it. And it says he is brokenhearted. It's something that he could have ignored, but he chose to press into it. It's something that he could have adapted to, but he chose to press into it. Something that everyone else had learned to live with became unbearable to him. And that burden becomes the beginning of a calling for Nehemiah, because here's the truth. The things that you stop noticing are often the very things that God may be asking you to notice again. And Nehemiah shows us what it looks like when a burden becomes a vision, and then a vision becomes an action. So again, there may be something in the world that bothers you, and here's what I'd like to say to you today, and this is a key point today as we start off. The burden that you bear often reveals the calling that you'll embrace. I'm going to say that again. The burden that you bear often reveals the calling you'll embrace. You rarely know when you're on the front end of something significant in life, something making a significant difference. And to set up our time today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a quick background leading up to Nehemiah's life. And Pastor Tony shared a little bit last week, but I'm going to expound a little bit more, kind of catch us up to speed. And in 587 BC, there was a king by the name of Nebuchadnezzar. Many of you may recognize that name in another famous story. He was a very evil king, and he led the Babylonian people to attack Jerusalem. And these people completely destroyed the city, their lifestyle, their cultures, their values. The temple was destroyed, and the Babylonians took the Jewish people into captivity, and they demoralized them beyond any hope. We fast forward a few decades later, and some of the Jewish people were finally released out of their captivity. And they go back to Jerusalem with all intents to build the wall, but they go back, and there's this demolished city with no economic structure, there's no jobs, there's no government, there's no leadership, there's no direction, and then ultimately there's no hope. So these earlier travelers, they tried, but they just gave up. They just lost hope along the way. And fast forward 140 years after this disruption, we have an ordinary, everyday guy named Nehemiah, and was suddenly brokenhearted for the plight of his people in his city. And he was just an ordinary man. He wasn't even verified on Instagram, okay? He was just an ordinary servant. His primary responsibility was being a cupbearer to the king. And his primary responsibility was to taste the food and the drink that would come before the king. And so this is significant because if we think about this, this means that Nehemiah lived every day not knowing if it was going to be his last day. But there was a loyalty that he still had to the king. And he was faithful to remain in the position that God had him. And we'll see how this paved a way for a greater work to be done in his life. And last week we saw that Nehemiah wept after receiving news of what had happened in the wall of Jerusalem that had been broken down. And Nehemiah grieved. He petitioned to God, and that leads us to where we are today. Nehemiah takes action. So how do you make a difference? I'm going to give you 4 thoughts today, and we're just going to be very practical today. Be very practical about how we can make a difference. When there is something that is stirring in our lives, how do we take action and how do we put these things into motion? So the first thing is that we seek God faithfully. So Nehemiah goes before God and he's praying and he's praying and he's praying again. And the timeline that Tony shared last week, he gave us a timeline last week, but I'm going to share this with you again, that Nehemiah heard about his people in the month of Kislev, which is around November to December our time here. And he starts by praying until the month of Nisan. Now, I just want to say that it was very hard when I was preparing this message. I had a number of jokes that I could have used for this, okay? And I withheld myself, and this is all I've got this morning, and I'm just going to leave it here. So he prayed until the month of Nisan, right? The important thing that I want to point out is that Nisan is 4 months after Kislev. So it's 4 months after. So for 4 months, Nehemiah is fasting, he's hurting, he's praying, he's seeking God for 4 months of his life. He's asking God to lead his steps. And it's impossible, I think, to describe how tricky it would have been for someone in Nehemiah's position, a cupbearer, to approach the king with a request. Right, because the cupbearer's primary responsibility was just to take, burdens off of the king, not put any responsibilities on the king. They never wanted to deliver the bad news. They always wanted to make sure it was good stuff that was going on. And for kings during this time, in fact, you would never again want to deliver anything but good news, because something would probably befall you that you would never wish upon yourself if you upset the king during this time. So we're going to start off in our scripture that we're going to read today, and this is Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, and it says this, and he's writing in first person here. He says, "I had never before appeared sad in his presence. So the king asked me, 'Why are you looking so sad? You don't look sick to me. You must be deeply troubled.'" Here's what I want to point out before we continue, is that you can see the intimacy between these two individuals. And as a cupbearer was in this time, they were very loyal to the king, and the king would have very much trusted Nehemiah. So there was an intimacy here, and there was the king and him had this connection with each other where they can have this kind of a conversation. But the thing is it was also very risky for Nehemiah to show any kind of negative emotion. Any kind of negative emotion that would upset the king, because during this time, you showed any kind of negative emotion, you upset the king, again, you were out of here. So Nehemiah, we see, responds to the king and says this, "Then I was terrified, but I replied, 'Long live the king, how can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire.' The king asked, 'Well, how can I help you?' With a prayer from the God of heaven, I replied, 'If it please the king, and if you are pleased with me, your servant, send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried.'" So I want you to notice this in verse 4. The king asks Nehemiah how he can help, but Nehemiah responded first in a very quick prayer. And many scholars believe that this is what we call breath prayer. And we've actually done some of these types of activations here before with breath prayer. You breathe in and you breathe out. And that moment of a prayer in and a prayer out, or a breath in and a breath out, in that moment you can have just a quick prayer and connection with God to help bring you peace and to bring you calmness. And we believe that that's what the kind of connection that Nehemiah had with God. And so here it was as simple as a breath, and he replied instantly. So this wasn't some long prayer retreat, like he had already done that. And so I just want to encourage you in your life, are you living a life in active connection with God? And are you talking to God like you would text a friend or pick the phone up and talk to someone? Are you in constant connection with God that at any moment that life gives you an upset, you can in an instant, as simple as a breath, you can have prayed to God and receive from him what it is that you need? And I just want you guys to remember this about prayer. It's not on the screens, but I just want to say this to you. There is nothing too big for God in prayer. There's nothing too big for God's power. There is nothing too small for God's heart. If you have a burden, take it to God. You start by seeking God faithfully. Is there a burden in your heart? If so, then pray about it. Prayer is the means by which we communicate with God. Through prayer, he can reveal his plans and his purposes for us in our lives. So when something is on our heart, it's likely on God's heart. So we seek God faithfully. And then what we do next is we define the vision clearly. The thing that we have at our foresight, we define the vision clearly. Our next slide here. So for most people, it's not the lack of caring that's your problem, right? You have an innate care for things. It's a lack of clarity, doing something specifically that you're called to do. Crystal clear clarity is what Nehemiah had. He has a vision from God. There's crystal clear clarity. This is what we see when the king asks Nehemiah, "What do you want me to do?" He says, "If it please the king, and if you are pleased with me, your servant, send me to Judah to rebuild the cities where my ancestors are buried." So in one sentence, with absolute clarity, he says, "Please send me to Judah so that I can rebuild the walls." Define the vision clearly. It's all defined very clearly. So what Nehemiah didn't do was he didn't have some long, drawn-out, just mumbling paragraph to the king, and it just was going on and on and on like that. And think about it, in our lives, how many times are we not able to make a clear decision, a clear statement, because we're just beating all around the bush on something, right? God, we need to be clear when there's something that's on our minds. So what is God calling you to do? Maybe for some of you, it's help children. Okay, well, how are you going to help them? Are you get specific? Do they have basic needs that need met? Where are they located? What kind of deeper ministry is it? There's going to be things that we have to press more into as these burdens become on our heart. And the bottom line is that if you can't define it, you can't do it. So we need to define it clearly. Nehemiah clearly asked the king to send him to Jerusalem so that he can rebuild the walls. And what's at the heart of all of this part this morning, and Tony shared last week how Nehemiah went through this process of grieving. He went through these struggles and this anxiety, and even as he's presenting this before the king, there's anxieties that he's dealing with. But then Nehemiah, just an ordinary man who is a cupbearer for the king, is called to take action. And instead of being scared, instead of not doing something, he makes a decision to step forward in boldness to do what he believes God is calling him to do. And that's the real big theme of this morning, is that when God has put a burden in our hearts, we want to follow that through. And as a church, we want to give you the resources, we want to give you the systems, the helps in place to be able to see these visions through. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of clearly defined callings here at Vineyard Life Church, things that we're seeing put in action because people have made these burdens seen these burdens and callings into a reality. And one of them you saw mentioned earlier is the Prayer and Encouragement Board. Some of these ladies just felt on their heart that this was an area that they wanted to do to minister to people here so that people could come here and not just come to your chairs and sit in here and then go back out and go about your way, but to create a space where we can find encouragement, we can pray for people, and it's just always active and always moving. That was a burden that was on their heart, and they said, we want to do this. How can we do this? We helped give them whatever they needed, and we said, do it, and they did it, and the wall is up now. And it's an amazing thing. I love seeing that kind of stuff happen. The other thing that I'm pleased to announce is that we are going to be soon in the next couple months starting an English as a second language course. Aurora, one of my dear friends that attends here, I'm not going to keep looking at her because she'll, point her out. But she just had this burden on her heart, and this is something she used to do. She used to teach English as a second language to people who were not fluent in the English language. And so she came and she said, hey, I would love to do something like this and for it to be through the church and that we could minister back to our community, because there are many people that are here and they need to learn the English language. And she is going to help teach that class, and we're going to give a space to people so they can do this. Matter of fact, I'm representing this morning some of our Hispanic friends, Somos family. It's a little mashup of the two languages, but it just says we are family. And so this was just a burden that was on her heart, and we've helped her to see that through. And here in the next couple of months, that vision's going to become a reality, and it's going to make us more of an indispensable church in our community. The last thing is, it's just a very personal thing to me, is a very clearly defined statement: start a life group. So it's crazy. It's been 10 years, exactly 10 years, that my wife and I have led a life group at this church. And we have been leading it for 10 years. We've seen people come and go through the group. It's looked different over the years. We've taken some breaks over that time. But it is a space that we have created within our house and within this church community that we can present for people to come, and they can feel blessed and feel connected with each other. I didn't plan on doing this, but if you're in my group, you just raise your hand. Just want to represent, just show that we have people who are active. There's a couple people there. Yeah, raise your hand. Yeah, she's I'm not in your group anymore, but she was. So Monica was in the group. And we have others. Chris Riley has started a men's Bible study for people for men on Sundays after service. Brian and April, they did a grief share. We're going to do another one at some point in the future. There are things that we are feeling called to do, and all we have to do is clearly define those things and see those things through. So for you, what's the burden on your heart? What lives could be impacted by you not ignoring these things? The burden you bear often reveals the calling that you'll embrace. And Nehemiah saw a need for his people, and there was a burden on his heart. And in boldness, he declared to the king what it is that he felt that he must do. So the next step that we see in line here is that we need to make our plans carefully. Sometimes all you need to do is just be intentional. Be intentional. Go find someone that you know can help you see this vision become a reality, whatever it is. Sometimes you just need to be intentional. Here's the thing: a goal without a plan is just a wish. Goal without a plan is just a wish. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is get organized. And I know some of you are cringing right now, even as I'm saying that. The most spiritual thing you can do is just get organized. God is a systematic God. We have a solar system. We have 7 days a week, not 8 some weeks, not 6 others, not 373 days a year one, 380 another. God is a systematic God. He's a God of order. This is a way of God's creation, a way of God's design. And even though it's sometimes hard for some of us to get organized, I want to encourage you to try and do so. We see in verse 6 that it said this: the king with the queen sitting beside him asked Nehemiah, "How long will you be gone? When will you return?" After I told him how long I would be gone, the king agreed to my request. I also said to the king, if it please the king, so now look at how specific he gets here. So if it please the king, Let me have letters addressed to the governors of the province of the Euphrates River, instructing them to let me travel safely through their territories on my way to Judah. And please give me a letter addressed to Asaph, the manager of the king's forest, instructing him to give me timber. I will need it to make beams for the temple, fortress, for the walls, and for the house for myself. So what does he do? He asks for protection. And he asked for provision, and then he says this in verse 8. And the king granted these requests because the gracious hand of God was on me. So what did he do? He sought God. He sought God. He was led by the Spirit of God, and God was directing his words and his steps and even his atmosphere. He created a plan and said, this is what I'm going to accomplish. God put this burden in his heart, and something he could have rejected, something he could have said yes to do. He followed what the Lord was asking of him. And so you might say that you want to create a plan, but you hesitate that you feel you don't have a perfect plan. And what I want to do is I just want to say this, that the plan that you have doesn't have to be perfect. I'd rather execute a good plan today with passion than a perfect plan months from now without passion. Just get the ball moving. Do the next right thing. Don't always think way down the line, but look at what's right in front of you. What has God put right in front of you? And he will do what he continues to do, and he will provide for you. He will be with you, just as he was with Nehemiah in this situation. Success is not achieving some accomplishment out there in the future. Success is being faithful to do the right thing today. So what's the next right thing for you? If you feel stuck, not sure what to do, I've got a video for you. And I want to set this up. And about 10 years ago, there was a motivational video that came out online. And it was from an actor. And it was just so inspiring. And I just found myself being so inspired by this. And many other people were inspired because it just felt so complex, but yet put so simple. But I'm not just going to explain it. I want to show you this video because it is so prevalent. So watch this.
Do it! Just do it! Don't let your dreams be dreams. Yesterday, you said tomorrow. So just do it! Make your dreams come true! Just do it! Some people dream of success while you're gonna wake up and work hard at it. Nothing is impossible. You should get to the point where anyone else would quit, and you're not gonna stop there. No, what are you waiting for? Do it! Just do it! Yes, you can! Just do it! If you're tired of starting over, stop giving up.
Thank you, Shia LaBeouf. 10 years ago, Shia LaBeouf. So what's the next right thing for you? I would simply say, as Shia says and Nike says, just do it, right? Just do it. There are needs that need met. There are lives that need touched. And can I just take a moment here this morning to lovingly say something to you? If there are needs that need met and there are lives that need touched, why are you just sitting here this morning? Why are we not putting these things into action? Why are we not making these burdens a reality? If we are going to be an indispensable church, if we are going to be a church that loves our community, a church that this community cannot live without, we have to do more than just letting our dreams be dreams, as he said. We have to put these things into action. And I realize that for many of us here this morning that there's different seasons of life we're in. Some of us in the room are much younger, some are middle-aged, some are older. It does not matter what age you are, what season of life you are in. You can still make a difference in the lives of others in the world around you. And I just want to encourage you this morning that if you are here and you have that burden in your heart, and as much as I laugh at that video that he did, that we just watched, I mean, how true is that, right? Like, why don't we just do the things that are on our heart to do? Put these things into action. God is calling us to more, and as we rebuild our lives, what happens is it paves a way for us to impact the lives of others. And I want to share with you this morning just a few examples of people in history that have seen needs and made them a reality. And the first one is Florence Nightingale. You guys know who that is? I know the doctors and nurses in their head are shaking their room. So during the Crimean War, Florence Nightingale, she saw that soldiers were dying not just from battle wounds, but unsanitary hospital conditions. So where others just saw this is just how things are, she saw that there was something that was preventable. There was preventable suffering. So she introduced sanitization processes, organized nursing care, and she used data. She was also a statistician to prove what was working and what wasn't. And she's considered the founder of modern nursing and transformed hospital care worldwide because she saw a burden and she saw a need that needed met, and she put it into action. And then whether you like Apple or not, the next one here is Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs saw a technology that was becoming powerful, but it wasn't really user-friendly. And he pushed for simplicity and beauty and intuitive design into technology, and products like the iPhone reshaped global communication, everyday life. And it was interesting. I didn't plan this, but when I was been doing some cleaning in our basement, and I came across a box of my wife Lauren's old stuff. And when Steve Jobs gave this presentation with the phone, he always talked about that little pocket that's like in your pants. Like for some of us, more so guys, I think. I don't know what ladies' pants are like, but guys' pants, you got a little pocket here. And the way he presented this, he said, in your pocket, what if you could fit something that was this small in your pocket? And now this is not an original iPhone, I am sad to say, because I would have a lot more money right now if that was the case. But this is one of the original iPod Touches, but it was a similar size to the original iPhone. You can actually see like the size difference. Like the whole idea was it could fit in a little pocket. It could be very easily accessible. And so I just thought this was neat. I just found this, and it actually turned on, and everything works, and there's like emails from 2011 in there. So it shows you how old it is. But he saw something that needed taken care of. There was a burden that was on his heart, and there were other men and people involved in the process of making this, but he was one of the front runners of this. So there's countless other individuals throughout history that we see put their visions and their burdens into actions. But I want to just give you a couple examples this morning just to show you that within the church, I mentioned those where some stuff is happening, and then outside of the church, where there are things all over that are happening in our communities and things because people took action. So as a review, we seek God faithfully, we define the vision clearly, we make plans carefully, and then lastly, we inspire people passionately. So what comes next for Nehemiah is challenging. We're not going to sugarcoat it. It was challenging for him. There was lots of opposition. There were hardcore critics and haters, and he puts in all this effort. But pushback happens. And what happens in our life? Sometimes we put in the effort and pushback happens. But we're called to persevere. So again and again, Nehemiah steps up, though, and he reaches deep within his soul. And at times where I'm sure he didn't know if it was even possible, every step of the way he took and he had faith, and he inspired people passionately as a result. So watch what Nehemiah does. Let's jump down to verse 17. He said, but I said to them, you know very well what trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire. Let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and end this disgrace. Then I told them about how the gracious hand of God had been on me, and about my conversation with the king. They replied at once, yes, let's rebuild the wall. So they began the good work. But when Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem the Arab heard about our plan, they scoffed contemptuously. What are you doing? Are you rebelling against the king? They asked. I replied, the God of heaven will help us succeed. We, his servants, will start rebuilding this wall. There's a quote that comes from the founder, who's credited as the founder of the Methodist movement, John Wesley, and he says this, light yourself on fire with passion and people will come from miles to watch you burn. Now, that's not literally, right? So don't do that literally, please. I know I've got some pyro in the room today. But the idea is this: let the fire burn, inspire people. When we take action, our actions yield inspiration to others. And I was going to share this towards the end, but I feel like the Lord is highlighting this to share now. And I just think about when this was put into practice. And I think it was the end of last year. There was a young lady that attends church here, and she was out during our ministry time. And I want to give a shout out to Dion. Dion went and she prayed for her. And this girl had told me after this account that before Dion came up to her, she had actually been contemplating whether she should pray for this other person that was being highlighted to her in the room. And she held back. She's like, I don't know if I want to do that. I'm not sure if I should pray for her, if I'll say the right things. But Dion went and she prayed for this young woman. And what happened directly after that was it inspired her to then go and pray for that other person. She says, if I can be prayed for like this, I can pray for someone else. And so it had a natural domino effect. When we say yes to the burdens that are on our heart, the things that God puts inside of us, the promptings that are there, it's like a domino effect. It starts just snowballing, one thing after the other after the other. So what do you care about? Let it break your heart to the point where you just can't keep it to yourself, where it just oozes out of you. Not with an anger that turns people away, but with a passion that draws people in. So what burdens you? Just do it. If God's favor is upon it, just do it and watch what he can do. Watch what can happen. And here's the thing. What you care about, the burden. What if it's not an accident? What if God has trusted it to you? Because it bothers you more than it bothers everyone else, maybe it's because it's an assignment that no one else has. God has burdened each of us specifically with something, a calling for each of us. I am so grateful to look across the room and see so many in this room who have put their burdens and their vision, the vision from the Lord, into action. And we have ministries here that are the better for it. The burden you bear often reveals the calling that you'll embrace. But you'd say, Clint, I'm just an ordinary person. I don't feel qualified. I don't feel prepared. Well, congratulations, because you're the perfect type of person that God loves to use. So how do you make a difference? You seek God faithfully, you define the vision clearly, make plans carefully, and inspire people naturally as a result to step out and do what only we can do as people of God. And watch what God can do more through those acts of faith than you could have ever imagined. So when we step back, as we kind of come towards the end of our story here today with Nehemiah, as we step back and we look at Nehemiah's life, it really starts with something simple but powerful, a burden. Something broken that he couldn't ignore anymore. And that burden didn't just stay a feeling. It became a prayer. It became clarity. It became a plan. And eventually it became a work that changed a city. And a little fast forward for you, not only did Nehemiah help rebuild the city and the physical structure of the city, but they actually experienced a reformation. They experienced a revival in their spiritual communities as a result of one man's actions to just go and rebuild a wall. Because God saw beyond what Nehemiah saw. And he knew that a people could be blessed because of one man's simple actions. So here's what I want to leave you with today. The burden that you feel may not be a distraction. It may be a direction for you. It may not be just a frustration. It may be an invitation. Because God often begins his greatest work in ordinary people that simply refuse to ignore what breaks their heart. So the question isn't what's wrong in the world. The question is, what is God asking me to do about it? So we seek God faithfully, define the vision clearly. We have that done. We make the plans. And as a result, you just step out and you do the next right thing. And as a natural result, your actions will inspire other people to act. When you do this, you may discover what Nehemiah discovered, and that's this, that the hand of God was with you all along. So don't ignore the burden, lean into it, because it might be the beginning of something far bigger than you could have imagined. Maybe for some of you, it's a burden within your own families. Maybe God is calling you to step up and make some tough decisions. I've loved that this church has provided a space amongst our ministry team and the Helping Others Heal ministry and so many others that we can help support people to help make these kind of tough decisions in their lives. But again, if we just say yes, if we just do these things that God has asked us to do, let's watch what he can do in our lives. I'm going to call the worship team back up. And at this time, I'm also just going to ask the ministry team members to get in place too so that they'll be ready to minister. And I just want to mention, the importance of the ministry team. And if you're new with us this morning, if you're still trying to figure out, like, what's this ministry team thing that they're doing? Well, it started out of a burden, out of a vision, that we recognize that people need more than just to come into a Sunday morning to sing some songs, to worship God, to have a message, and then just to leave. We want you to be ministered to. We believe that there are areas in your life that we can help be a blessing to you with. And so those actions have then inspired other people, and we've seen healing come from these things. Now, this morning, you're going to notice that our ministry team members, they're going to be we'll have some over here by the baptistry, and we've actually moved it, and they're going to be in the back over there by the sound booth. And one of the reasons we've done this is just to create an additional level for those of you who may be dealing with the anxiety. So, Nehemiah kind of wrestled with this, and we recognize that sometimes it can still even be tough just to come up here up front and to get prayer. And so we hope that this also can help for those who maybe deal with a little higher anxieties, to give you a little bit more ease of access. But fear not, because there are still people that are going to look across the room, and they may come to you, right? Because God highlights people all across. So our ministry team members will be available. I'm just going to ask you guys to go ahead and just stand with us now. And before I close our time today, as we think about what are those areas in our lives that we need to take action with. Maybe it's generosity. Maybe there's something that God has called you to be generous with. Maybe it's time. Time is the biggest gift sometimes that we can give someone. Whatever it is in your life, I would just ask you, whatever God has highlighted to you today, because I really do believe that for each person here in the room, that God has already begun to put something on your mind. And we call those promptings. God has prompted something on your mind that he, just like with Nehemiah, he is asking you to say yes. You might not know where it's going to go fully, but just look at what's right in front of you, because God will be with you. God will guide you. And then I also want to just say this, that if you are here today and you would say that you do not know who Jesus is, you don't have a relationship with Jesus, you would say, well, this all sounds good, but I don't know how to do any of this stuff. Well, I believe today God is inviting you into a relationship with him. And if that is you, all you have to do is the scriptures say it's a free gift that's given to us. All we have to do is believe in our hearts, confess it with our mouth, and we'll be saved. If that's you, I would also love for you to see one of our ministry team members. They will guide you through a prayer of salvation, that you can come into a relationship with Jesus before you leave here today. Because none of this stuff is possible without a relationship with God. So as we move into our time of ministry, our time of worship together, I would just encourage you, whatever the Lord has put on your heart, press into it. And sometimes all we need to do is just say yes. So we'll lead now. We have communion available around the rooms. You don't have to be a member here. Just love Jesus to partake in this. I would encourage you to take it seriously. Spend time with the Lord first before you take those elements. And then what I'll do is I'll come back after service to close up. But now we're just going to enter into a time of worship together. So let's not just try to fly through this. Let's come more into God's presence, asking him what he can do more in our lives.